Hello and welcome back to The Independent Pianist, or welcome if it's your first time. I'm Cole Anderson, and today I'm completing my series on Brahms' 6 piano pieces, Opus 118. It's been really a marvelous journey getting to know these works. It's been a pleasure to seek out the best possible interpretation of each work, which has been no easy task, and to record them, and then also to delve into the analysis and to really seek out the inner musical meaning, partly through intellectual analysis and partly through just trying to understand the emotional world that Brahms was trying to create. This is definitely a set that works extremely well when played complete. So I do want to kind of talk about the overall effect of all 6 pieces. Is there kind of an overarching journey that Brahms is taking us on, or are these 6 pieces just kind of put together at random? I think that there is kind of a trajectory that Brahms had in mind. It is kind of a dark one, but I think it is there, and it's important to recognize it and notice it if you're going to play these pieces. I think the key to it is perhaps first in the succession of key areas for each piece. We start in the key of A minor, A major for the first 2 pieces. Then we move down a second to G minor for the ballade. Then the 4th and 5th pieces again are linked F minor, F major, and then finally we reach the emotional climax of the work in the key of E flat minor. So the key areas are actually form a descending scale. And this is reflected in some of the motivic material in the different pieces. As I mentioned in my first video on the first 2 pieces, those 2 intermezzi share this kind of downward stepwise motive at their beginning. And you can also see a little bit of that in the final piece, the 6th piece in E flat minor. There's a falling second motive, a very expressive appoggiatura kind of motive, which comes back again and again. There's also a falling octave motive in the 4th piece, and in the 5th piece, the opening soprano line descends down the octave as well. The one piece where it's not as clear that this kind of falling descending motive is really integral to the structure is in the ballade. But the ballade almost feels like it's trying to break out of the structure imposed by the other movements. I think there's a dramatic quality to it being so different in many respects from its counterparts. So obviously these kind of motivic connections are not going to be at the forefront of your awareness when you hear these works, but I think it's very interesting to notice it because it was probably in Brahms's mind as kind of an abstract background structural device. Of course, I don't know if this was intentional on Brahms's part. I suspect it was. In a way, it doesn't even really matter as long as the connections do exist. I think it does have something to do with the structure of how we perceive these pieces as a set. But even more important than these kind of technical motivic aspects are the emotional world of this set. And I think the progression of moods definitely mirrors this descending scalar idea. There's a feeling of having to contend with darkness and depression. And always there's a feeling of trying to rise above this. So you can see this in the minor major movement of the 1st to 2nd piece and of the 4th to 5th piece. But it's unclear to what extent we can rise above this as we reach the last piece in E flat minor. Definitely depression, loneliness, these are things that Brahms dealt with a lot in his life. He chose to be alone for the most part. He found it important for his art, for what he wanted to do in life. But it was difficult for him, particularly toward the end of his life. So I think it's very powerful that he speaks to this quality, which is something that all of us have to deal with at some point or other. We have to deal with loss, loneliness. These are very human experiences. It's really just part of being alive. So I think it is very powerful that he speaks to these things so directly. At the same time, I don't want to give the impression that this set is kind of a wallowing in self-pity and depression. That's not it at all. I think he recognizes the darker side of things, but at the same time, the overall impression of the set is one of overwhelming beauty and magic, the kind of magic of this journey that you're on. So I do really feel about this set the same way that I feel about Schubert's Last Sonata. One time I heard a wonderful teacher of mine describe that sonata as kind of a depiction of a human life, with all its sorrows, joys, richness, all the scenes that we see on our path from birth to death. So there's so much that's amazing about that, and I think that it is really a testament to Brahms's genius that he is able to put so much emotion and so much breadth of understanding and power into this relatively small set of 6 pieces. So let's talk about the last 2 pieces individually a little bit and in context with the full set. The 5th piece is one of only 2 in this set that has a unique title. Rather than being called an intermezzo, Brahms calls it a romance. So that's only this piece that has a unique title, and then also the 3rd piece, the ballade. And maybe you could say that the 2 pieces with these different titles, these unique titles, have a little bit more of a definite character to them. I think Brahms generally chose the term intermezzo for pieces where the emotional character is more elusive. And maybe that's kind of obvious for the ballade. It's a very powerful, assertive kind of piece. Maybe it's a little less obvious for the romance, but I kind of feel like at this point, all the veils fall away and Brahms is speaking to us directly. It's one of the most beautiful of all his pieces. It definitely jockeys for position as my favorite of the set, along with the famous 2nd piece in A major. There's a kind of honesty and directness to the expression here, which I really cherish. In the outer sections, it's structured kind of like a chorale melody. Well, in the middle section, we get a kind of dream lullaby with free variations on the basic idea. The opening texture is so typical for Brahms, with the melody kind of encased in the middle of the harmonies. And you'll also notice in this piece the kind of subtle rhythmic variations that he's playing with. So notice how he gives a freshness and structure to the rhythm by having the accompaniment start with a quarter half note pattern and then switch to half note quarter pattern. And then at the end of each phrase, he has this beautiful subtle hemiola effect. And it's quite interesting, this hemiola happens at the end of every phrase, and at the very end of the piece, he even marks accents on the hemiola. You don't oftentimes hear this done, but you see how there are the 3 C's in the tenor and the left hand marked with accents. So I think those should actually be brought out. I tried to do that in this recording. It's a kind of expressive variation that he's putting on this hemiola, just to bring it out a little bit more the last time. Brahms's compositional technique is in full flower in the manner in which he develops this opening idea as well. He has the melody that was at first encased in the center of the texture flower into the soprano. It's an extremely rich, wonderful kind of texture. And there's many little details of the piano writing which just show how well he understood the piano. He puts these kind of expressive arpeggios into the left hand, like this one right here, which require you to take a certain amount of time to really make them work. You have to broaden the tempo slightly leading up to that arpeggio. Otherwise, it'll sound very abrupt. So as I mentioned, the middle section is this kind of lullaby with this rocking motion in the left hand and a duet in the right hand. This middle section is also kind of interesting because Brahms uses some interesting modality. He uses the Lydian scale, and this kind of almost looks like he's using a dominant 7th chord in the key of A. So that would be a dominant 7th chord built on the root E, G sharp, B, D natural. However, I don't think you should really consider it as a dominant 7th chord in this context because it's not being used that way. It doesn't resolve correctly. It just goes straight back to a D major chord. So it has a very archaic kind of flavor to it, a very folksy kind of flavor to it. He's really just using the sharp 4th degree for color here. It puts me in mind of certain of Chopin's mazurkas, where he also uses the Lydian scale quite prominently, and it gives this kind of open, folksy kind of quality. That's probably where Brahms got the idea. Then there's another very interesting rhythmical detail which usually is ignored in performances of this piece. Brahms marked a very precise metric modulation here at the end of this section in the transition back to the opening section. And you can see that he is using the rhythm, the quarter half note rhythm, of the A section, the beginning of the A section. That's supposed to help tie us back into that recap. I think for this reason, people usually play this part basically in the opening tempo, maybe a little bit slower, but Brahms actually is marking for a very slow tempo to be used here. You'll see that he marks that the quarter note of the 6/4 should be equal to the half note in the previous section. So if you really follow this direction, you end up with a very, very slow tempo indeed for this part, but I think it actually works. I think time is supposed to kind of stand still here, and these ominous rumbling trills in the left hand are supposed to really fill some space and fill us with a sense of foreboding. And again, Brahms finds some new ways to vary the theme this last time, some new beautiful ways to allow the theme to flower. Now, the last piece in this set is also a fairly well-known one. It's one of the more popular among his pieces. It's also one of the darkest, one of the ones where he most clearly depicts his own sorrow. The main melody, famously, is derived from the plain chant Dies Irae, of course prominently used in the Requiem Mass, and used by many composers through history for works that are of some kind of sepulchral character, as famously used by Berlioz in the Symphonie Fantastique, by Rachmaninoff in many pieces, but maybe most famously in the Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, and also by Brahms here. Now, he's paraphrasing the chant a little bit. The full chant would go something like this. So he's just using the first 4 or 5 notes of the chant to create this melody, which is really his own. It is actually his own melody. It's not an exact quotation, but it's too clear to be anything else but based upon that chant. And something you'll also notice about the way that he structures this piece is that the accompaniment is very, very irregular, always changing, always kind of slippery and difficult to pin down. He begins with this kind of weird diminished seventh arpeggio right after the opening of the melody has been stated alone. And this could almost just seem like a caprice, like some kind of little fantastical element. But this diminished seventh arpeggio is actually going to return. I think that's why he highlights the end of it with this marking perdendo, dying away. I interpret that as meaning that we should actually stretch that diminished seventh arpeggio out a bit, slow down a little bit as we diminuendo. In the climactic passage in the middle section, this is going to come back in a very powerful fashion. And you'll notice how prominent these kind of falling diminished seventh arpeggios are throughout the work. So again, kind of tying into that motivic idea of falling patterns, falling scales, falling seconds, falling octaves, falling arpeggios. And there's this extraordinarily beautiful passage which almost defies analysis, where there's a kind of canon. We hear this imitation between the voices, and every element of the piano writing contributes to the expression of this music. Notice how he actually puts in this very wide leap in the left hand every time. You have to play these rapid notes in the left hand, catch the last note on the pedal, and then reach your left hand over to play the next melodic entrance. That forces you to take a little bit of an expressive delay. The entire structure here is just so beautiful, the way that the melodies seem to hang in the air and kind of float over each other. He does repeat this section once, and of course, he doesn't just repeat it exactly. He has all kinds of new, beautiful developments in the accompaniment. There's something just so wonderfully poetic about the physical way that Brahms writes all this. The way that he has the left hand kind of crossing over and back across the right hand, making this eerie kind of lacework tracery that surrounds the melody in this cloud. And there's a real surprise in store for us when we get to the middle section. As the music reaches its most sepulchral moment, it seems to be fading away into nothingness, he begins this kind of drum beat in the left hand. There's no other way to describe it. There's a very percussive effect that he creates by using the double notes in the left hand in this way. Also, the left hand is outlining open fifths of the chord, not the full harmony, but just open fifths. And there's this kind of march motive which always seems to be trying to reach upward and upward again and again, maybe trying to break out of this sadness, of this depression, or whatever it is. But then at the highest moment, the diminished seventh arpeggio that we heard in the first part of the piece comes back and overwhelms the texture, and we get a fortissimo restatement of the opening Dies Irae theme. Then this is repeated in even more emphatic form and reaches a truly stunning climax before everything is swept away and we come back to this mysterious character of the opening. And of course, Brahms can never resist rhythmic intensification, so he uses syncopation and polyrhythms to create greater intensity this last time. So I hope you've enjoyed this little talk about Brahms's Opus 118. I have the other videos up on my Brahms playlist as well, which should be popping up right about now. So if you haven't seen them yet, you should check those out as well if you like this video and like these pieces. Please do support the channel if you can at patreon.com, www.patreon.com/independentpianist. And thank you to all my current Patreon supporters. It really means a lot to me that you're there supporting me each month. Every little bit helps, so don't be shy, even if it's just $1 or $2. It's really, really helpful. It means a lot to me. I'm also planning to try to put some more content on Patreon for my Patreon supporters. So far, I haven't done so much on there. I've just kind of communicated with people through the platform. But I'm kind of wanting to do something like a live stream where I could just chat with Patreon supporters and have something more informal and direct kind of communication, preferable maybe to the comment section of YouTube. But if you don't feel like supporting the channel financially, I mean, just hitting the subscribe button and the like button is very, very helpful. And tuning back next week for some more great music. In the meantime, stay tuned for the complete performance of Brahms' Opus 118, number 5 and 6. Thanks for watching. Take care.